Welcome to the dark side of love. He slipped it in, but not where he should have. Sometimes the monsters in our stories don't hide in the shadows. They smile at us across the fence. They help fix a broken pipe. They ask how your day was and pretend to mean it. But behind their familiar faces hides something far more dangerous than a stranger: comfort. And this is the story of how comfort turned into a trap. My name is Emily, and I never thought I'd find myself telling a story like this. Growing up in a quiet rural town, my life had always felt simple, safe. I imagined that adulthood would follow the same gentle path: family dinners, backyard barbecues, a loving husband, maybe a dog or two. But nothing really prepares you for how quickly comfort can turn into chaos. Daniel and I were college sweethearts. We met in the university library, both scrambling to finish a paper we had put off for too long. One awkward exchange turned into a conversation. That conversation became coffee. Coffee turned into love. We married young. We didn't have much: some mismatched furniture, student debt, and a lot of hope. But we had each other, and at the time, that felt like enough. When we moved into our first rental home together, it felt like we were stepping into a new chapter. A quaint little place on the edge of town with peeling paint and a crooked garden fence. But we loved it. It had character, a soul. We could see our future unfolding on that little patch of grass out back. That's when we met Mr. Harrington, our landlord. He was in his early 60s, with a warm smile and a polite demeanor that made you feel at ease almost immediately. He had the air of someone who had seen a lot, lived through a few storms, but still chose to be kind. He came by the day we moved in just to introduce himself and make sure we settled in okay. He even helped Daniel fix the fence, which surprised me. How many landlords do that at the time? I thought nothing of it. Just a friendly older man making sure his property was in good hands. But sometimes the things we brush off as kindness are actually calculated gestures. And I would learn that far too late. At first, Mr. Harrington's visits were perfectly normal. He'd stop by once every couple of weeks to check on the property. Small talk, weather updates, harmless. But as Daniel got busier with work, his job in sales had him traveling more often. I started spending more and more time alone at home. That's when the dynamic began to shift subtly. At first, Mr. Harrington's visits became more frequent. He started dropping by unannounced, not to fix anything, but just to see how things were going. Sometimes he'd bring over vegetables from his garden. Other times, it was just to chat. And at first, I appreciated it. It felt nice to have someone ask how I was doing, to feel seen. I didn't realize how much I missed that until I started to feel it again. But as the weeks passed, those conversations started to take on a different tone. One afternoon, I was outside, tending to the garden, something I loved doing to pass the time while Daniel was away. The sun was warm on my skin, and I was lost in thought when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mr. Harrington, standing just a little too close. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he asked. I smiled politely. "It is. You seem at peace here," he said, watching me carefully. "Like you really belong." I remember freezing for a second. It was a strange comment, but I laughed it off. "We love it here. It's cozy." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, watching me. And then, almost as if he had rehearsed it, he said, "You know, it's easy to forget how good it feels just to be heard, to have someone really listen to you." His words hung in the air like smoke. I nodded, unsure how to respond. He was right, in a way. I had been feeling distant from Daniel, not in a dramatic way, just the slow drift that happens when life gets busy and connection starts to fade. But I didn't want to admit that. Not to him. So I smiled again. Well, thank you for checking in. I appreciate it. But something about the way he looked at me as I said it didn't sit right. That night, I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was reading too much into things. Mr. Harrington was just being kind. Maybe a little too kind, but still harmless. But the unease had taken root. And the worst part, I didn't know who to talk to about it. Daniel was constantly on the road, stressed from work. I didn't want to burden him. And besides, what would I even say? Hey, our landlord gave me a weird look today. No. That would sound ridiculous. So I said nothing. And I let it continue. The next visit changed everything. Daniel was away on a business trip. I had just finished getting ready for bed, tea on the nightstand, book in hand. When the doorbell rang. It was almost 9 p.m. I hesitated before answering it. Who would show up at this hour? When I opened the door, Mr. Harrington was standing there, smiling. Evening, Emily, he said casually. Just passing through. Thought I'd check in. There was no reason for him to be there. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing had been requested. Still, I didn't want to be rude. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He made himself comfortable on the couch, and we chatted about the neighborhood, the garden, small things. But the way he looked at me was different this time. Longer, heavier, like he was studying me. Then came the moment that made my skin crawl. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hand on the edge of the couch between us. You know, he said softly, it's rare to meet someone like you, someone who actually cares, who listens. It might have sounded innocent, but there was something in his voice, a note of intimacy that didn't belong. I laughed awkwardly, hugging my knees to my chest to put more distance between us. He noticed the shift immediately. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said, his voice low. I just think you're special, Emily. He said my name like it was something precious, something he shouldn't have been allowed to touch. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had tightened, and I could barely breathe. He stood. I'll let you get back to your evening, he said with a small smile. But the look in his eyes said something else entirely. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, confusion, fear, shame, and guilt. Because part of me had seen it coming, and I had let it. What happened that night stayed with me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I replayed the conversation over and over, trying to figure out where it had crossed the line. If I had done something wrong, if I had encouraged it somehow. I told myself it was nothing, just words, just a moment. I could move past it, but then he came back. Again, and again, each visit more tense than the last. I tried to carry on like nothing had happened. I told myself I had overreacted, that maybe I'd read too much into Mr. Harrington's tone, his words, his presence that night. After all, he didn't do anything. He hadn't crossed any physical line. It was just a strange moment, a misunderstanding, right? But deep down, I knew better. You don't forget a look like that. You don't forget the way the air changes when someone who once felt harmless suddenly starts to feel like a threat you can't name. Over the next week, I kept myself busy. I rearranged the bookshelves. I started baking again. I even called Daniel, more than usual while he was away, just to hear his voice, just to remind myself who I really loved, who I was really committed to. And when Mr. Harrington didn't show up for several days, I began to feel a little relief. Maybe he got the message. Maybe it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness he now regretted. But that illusion shattered quickly. It was a Tuesday evening. Quiet. The kind of evening where the silence felt almost soothing. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, trying a new recipe I had seen online. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic, and for a brief moment, things felt normal again. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. Knife midair. Something inside me already knew who it would be. Peeking through the kitchen window, I saw him, Mr. Harrington, standing at the door, holding something in his hand. A bottle of wine. I swallowed hard, wiping my hands on a towel. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Emily," he said, smiling warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." His tone was light, casual, like we were old friends. Like that moment on the couch had never happened. "Not at all," I said, masking my discomfort with a practiced smile. "You look like you were cooking," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Smells incredible in there. I thought I'd bring this by, a little something for dinner." He lifted the bottle slightly. I barely registered the label. "That's thoughtful of you," I murmured, my tone careful. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and I let him dot as he wandered toward the kitchen, commenting on the smells and complimenting my incredible attention to detail. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. His words were kind, but there was something beneath them, a weight, a deliberate softness that made them feel less like compliments and more like confessions waiting to escape. "You have a gift," he said, watching me stir the sauce. "Even simple meals become something more when you're the one making them." I didn't know how to respond, so I said the only thing that felt safe. "It's nothing fancy. Just dinner." He chuckled. "Even your idea of just dinner is better than anything I've had in a long time." I turned back to the stove, desperate for a reason to end the conversation. "Would you like some water?" "Actually," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "What I'd really like is to talk." I froze. "Talk?" He nodded, suddenly solemn. "We haven't really had a chance to sit down and really connect. Not since the first time I met you. I feel like there's something unspoken between us. Something that deserves acknowledgement." I didn't know what to say. "We've always had such easy conversations, haven't we?" he continued. "But lately, I've been thinking about life, about how quickly it passes us by, and how often we ignore what our hearts are really telling us." He was closer now, still not too close, not in a way that could be called inappropriate, but emotionally, he was closing in fast. "I think there's something between us, Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the beginning, I felt it. A pull. Something real." My hands trembled. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Harrington," I said quietly, "I'm married. I love my husband. Deeply." "I know," he said quickly. "I know. And I respect that. I would never try to come between you and Daniel. That's not what this is, but it was. We both knew it. I just needed you to know how I feel." He continued, "to get it off my chest. You don't have to respond. You don't have to say anything." I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. I backed away slightly, using the excuse of wiping down the counter. "You've always been so kind to us," I said carefully, "and I appreciate that. But I need to be very clear. I value the boundary between us, between landlord and tenant, and I need that line to stay firm." He exhaled slowly, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. "Of course," he said. "I didn't mean to overstep. I thought maybe you felt something too." That sentence landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He left shortly after, his goodbye polite, his tone subdued. But the damage had already been done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Had I been too kind, too open? Had I somehow given him the impression that I wanted something from him, that I needed emotional attention? I hated that I was blaming myself, but part of me couldn't help it. And then another part of me, a smaller, darker voice, whispered something else. You like being seen. Not by him, necessarily, but the feeling, the attention, the way someone had noticed the things Daniel had stopped noticing. And that scared me more than anything else. I didn't tell Daniel. Not right away. He came home 2 days later, exhausted from travel. I met him at the door, wrapped in his arms, and felt the familiar safety of him, the smell of his skin, the warmth of his chest. But I also felt guilt. Heavy, suffocating. He noticed I was quieter than usual over dinner. You okay? He asked between bites. I forced a smile. Just tired. It's good to have you home. And it was. But I also knew that something had shifted inside me. A tension I couldn't name or shake. Days passed. I tried to reclaim my rhythm. I went for walks, called my sister, baked more than I usually did. I even wrote a letter, one I never sent, where I poured out every feeling. The confusion, the discomfort, the guilt, the fear of ruining something that didn't technically happen, but emotionally felt very real. But Mr. Harrington wasn't done yet. He came by one afternoon while Daniel was at work. I saw him through the kitchen window before the doorbell even rang. I didn't want to answer. Every part of me screamed to stay still, stay silent. But I opened the door anyway. Just wanted to check on the place, he said. Won't take long. His tone was respectful, measured, different. And then, before I could respond, he added softly, I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other night. I want to apologize if it made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention. I nodded slowly. Thank you. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, I still mean what I said, but I also respect your boundaries. I just needed to be honest with you. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, creating a wall, physically and emotionally. I want to be honest too, I said. I care about this house, about keeping things peaceful, but my marriage is everything to me. That's where my heart is. That's where it will always be. A long silence followed. Then he nodded. I understand. He said quietly, I truly do. I won't bring it up again. And just like that, he walked away. As I stood in the doorway, watching him disappear down the path, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, fear, and something I hated admitting, grief. Grief over a sense of safety that had been shattered. Grief over the innocence that had been lost. Grief over the realization that sometimes the lines between right and wrong aren't as sharp as we want them to be, especially when someone crosses them without touching you. That evening, Daniel and I had dinner together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fully present. Not as a woman juggling emotions in secret. Not as someone trying to manage another man's feelings. Just his wife, the one who chose him and would keep choosing him, even if the world tried to pull me in 1,000 other directions. Part 3. The final visit. Days turned into weeks. Harrington kept his distance, just as he promised. No unexpected doorbells. No strange comments. No unsettling stares. But the silence was loud, and with every passing day, I felt the weight of what had happened settle more firmly into my chest. Like a stone I'd swallowed and now had to carry everywhere. Some people think boundary crossing only matters when there's physical contact. They don't understand that emotional overreach, uninvited intimacy, can feel just as violating. Because when someone reaches for your heart instead of your hand, it becomes harder to explain why it hurt. Harder to prove it happened at all. I threw myself into my routine. Clean, cook, walk, breathe, repeat. I started waking up earlier just to stand on the porch with my coffee and let the cold morning air remind me I was still in control of my choices. That no one could take that from me. And Daniel, sweet, steady Daniel. He was trying, too. He'd started coming home earlier from work, making more time for us. He even brought home flowers one afternoon, something he hadn't done since our first anniversary. I missed you, he said, simply, and I knew he meant it. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words stayed locked behind my teeth. Not because I didn't trust him. I did. But because I didn't want to infect what we had with what I had experienced. Some secrets aren't born from betrayal. Some are born from protection. I wasn't hiding the truth to be dishonest. I was shielding the truth because it was poisonous, and our marriage was too precious to contaminate. Then came the final visit. It was a Thursday afternoon, cloudy, windy. The kind of day that presses against the windows like it's trying to listen in. I had just finished folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I knew. I don't know how, but I knew. When I opened the door, Mr. Harrington stood there, holding a small envelope in his hand. "Hi," he said quietly. I didn't speak, just looked at him, waiting. "I just came to drop this off," he said, extending the envelope. "It's not much, just a letter. Nothing inappropriate, I promise. Just words I needed to put somewhere." I took it, not opening it. "And I wanted to say goodbye," he added. My brows furrowed. "Goodbye?" He nodded. "I've decided to sell the house. I've owned it long enough. It's time. I've got a buyer, young couple, just married." I blinked. "You're selling?" "Yes. I've already started packing. This'll be my last week in town." Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "for listening, for your kindness, for never humiliating me, even when I crossed the line." "You did cross it," I said, voice low but steady. "I know," he replied, eyes downcast. "And I regret it. But I also don't, because for a brief moment, I remembered what it was like to feel something real." He looked up at me then, and I saw no threat in his eyes, just weariness. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to leave knowing you understood that I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded slowly. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrington. Goodbye, Emily." He turned and walked away. No smile. No lingering glance. Just the sound of retreating footsteps and a door closing one final time. I waited until nightfall to open the envelope. Inside was a letter. Simple. Handwritten. Barely a page long. "Emily, you may never understand how deeply a simple conversation with you could shift the tone of my entire day. You reminded me that sincerity still exists. That warmth hasn't gone extinct. And yes, I confused that warmth with something more. And for that, I apologize. You have a quiet strength about you. One that invites people to bring their broken pieces and feel safe. I brought mine. Too much of mine. And you were still kind. That kindness changed me. I hope your husband knows the treasure he has. And I hope, someday, you'll look back on this not as a story of discomfort, but as one of boundaries, grace, and strength. With respect, Mr. Harrington." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a box of things I didn't want to revisit. It wasn't forgiveness. It was finality. And in some strange way, peace. Reconnection. In the days that followed, I found myself turning toward Daniel more. I let my guard down, not to reveal what had happened, but to let love in again, to open the doors I had unknowingly shut. One night, we sat on the couch, his arm around my shoulder, watching some silly movie we'd both seen 100 times. He looked down at me, brushing hair from my face. "You okay?" he asked dot this time. I nodded without lying. I'm okay. And I meant it. Because healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's found in the quiet return to normalcy. In choosing what you already have, again and again, despite temptation, loneliness, or the thrill of being seen. The real lesson you know. I used to think cheating was only about sex. That infidelity meant physical betrayal. But now I know better. It can start long before that. With a look, a word, a conversation that stretches just a little too long. A compliment that lingers. A presence that makes you question what's missing elsewhere. The cracks in a relationship don't form from explosions. They form from erosion. But love, real love, survives when we choose to patch those cracks, not pretend they're not there. A full year has passed. The new landlords are kind, distant, professional. They respect space and schedules. They don't linger at the door. And Mr. Harrington, I never saw him again. But sometimes, when I walk through our garden, I still remember the afternoon he said, "You seem like you really belong here." He was right about that. I do. Not because someone noticed me, but because I chose to stay.